Hey, Dr. Greg here again with some more information about vitamin D. Now, up to this point, we've looked at a couple research papers on vitamin D. We also looked at the levels that we should really have in our system in order for the vitamin D to have any benefit with all the problems we have, from our brain to our heart to our kidneys to our immune system and what have you. And we know that that number probably is 50 or above, and probably less than 75 or as high as 75. Anything lower than 50 has shown to be problematic in terms of autoimmune problems, heart problems, lung problems, skin problems, all that type of stuff can be related to a lower vitamin D level. This is just based on research. This is not my opinion. This is just what I've read. And we're going to go into a couple more research papers in terms of vitamin D. But before I do that, I want to talk about what foods have vitamin D in them and what foods that you should be eating. So it is always better to get vitamins naturally in our diet as opposed to taking supplements, because you're not really sure the quality of the supplements. You're not really sure how much to take, and that's we're going to talk about near the end of this video on what you might look to determine how much you should take. So the foods are just pretty simple, and they can be very tasty. The first food that has vitamin D is salmon. Salmon is a good source of vitamin D, and you want to make sure that it's a wild salmon, the sockeye salmon or whatever. That you don't want farm-raised salmon. It tends to be a little more, has issues with it in terms of how they're raised. The other one doesn't sound as appealing. It's herrings and excuse me, sardines. Now, you can do really good things with sardines and herrings, putting them in tomato sauce and chopping them up and stuff, but they're an awesome source of vitamin D. The other source is canned tuna. Now, we all like canned tuna, but the thing is there's mercury in tuna, so we can't have it every single day, but once a week or once or twice a month or whatever is a good source of vitamin D, is canned tuna. The other is going to surprise you a little bit, is egg yolks. Egg yolks are an awesome source of all sorts of great things for our bodies, and one happens to be vitamin D. I have an egg a day, and I have no cholesterol issues. Also, another source, the only plant source that is out there that has vitamin D, is mushrooms. And it's interesting, mushrooms get their vitamin D from sunshine like we do, right? We get vitamin D from being exposed to the sun. And mushrooms are the same thing, and they're a great source of vitamin D. Although it's not it's what we call vitamin D2, it's not the most utilized by our bodies, but it's also a very good source of the highest levels of vitamin D2. It has other vitamin Ds in it, but it's a good source of getting vitamin D into your system naturally. Now let's talk about the fortified vitamin D and fortified calcium. Basically useless. Milk, soy milk, all the nut butter, all the nut milks, the orange juice with fortified, it's baloney. You're not really absorbing it. It's not really a good source of vitamin D, and I can't really recommend it. Now let's talk about sun exposure. You've heard a lot of fears about being exposed to the sun and cancer, skin cancer, and all that kind of stuff. Well, you have to be exposed to the sun sometimes. And the optimum time of the day is actually between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. And I'm not talking about laying out there that whole time. 15 minutes. 15 minutes of being out in the sun is plenty. And this is not with sunscreen on. Sunscreen blocks the rays that will actually help produce the vitamin D. There's other benefits to sun that we'll talk about in other videos, but vitamin D is the one I'm talking about now, and that, you need sunshine. You need to get out in the sun to get that vitamin D produced. Now, here's the thing. You need to know your level. Again, I talked about that earlier. What is your level of vitamin D? If it's in the 30s, you got to get it up there. If it's in the 50s or the 60s, you're doing pretty well and you're good. I wouldn't do anything. So if you're less than 50, I would want you to try these foods first and getting out in the sun, and then check your vitamin D levels in probably a couple months, 2 to 3 months. If it's still low, then we need to talk about supplementation. Now, supplementation is going to depend upon how low your vitamin D is. Now, you've heard of emergency supplementation where your vitamin D level is like in the tank, like 20, and you need to take large amounts of vitamin D. Now, there are several sources of vitamin D that are supplements, and some are good and some are not so good. Those that are based on natural foods are better for you than those that are synthetic. And what I recommend is if there are certain phases. There's emergency, there's maintenance, and then there's the winter dose. Winter dose, you want to increase these foods probably, and you probably want to supplement yourself a little bit, but you always need to check the vitamin D levels. And I kind of recommend doing it on 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months. Because if you're at 75, there's no need to take supplements. If you're at 20, yeah, there's a need to take supplements. So you need to know what your vitamin D levels are before you know how much supplements you need to take, even if you're doing all these foods and following the plan of being out in the sun for 15, 20 minutes at a time. That's the only way you're going to know if you need to take supplements or not. So going to Amazon or going here or there saying, oh, I should take vitamin D because it should be high, well, your vitamin D can already be okay. So there's no need to take supplements, so you're wasting your money and putting stress on your system that it doesn't need. Getting vitamin D from your foods is always better because your food processes it, your body processes it properly and utilizes what it needs and get rid of what it doesn't need. When you're taking supplements or even medication, your body's kind of forced to deal with it and to use it. So the first step you need to do is to find out what your vitamin D levels are. And we know from research and everything that we looked at that 50 is really good, 75 is optimum. It's like no need to go beyond 75, and lower than 50 is probably not so good. So one of the first things you need to do if you want to look at this is to check your vitamin D levels. And if you don't want to check your vitamin D levels, just eat these foods and get into the sun and just see how you feel after 6 months. Don't take no need to take supplementation. That's all I have. This is Dr. Greg, changing the way we look at health.